What if some of the best, healthiest vegetables just disappeared from our plates? Long ago, the ancient Greek farmers grew some amazing superfoods that most people have forgotten. Let's dig into them and see what we have been missing. Imagine walking through an ancient Athenian market at sunrise. The smell of warm bread, salty sea air, and crushed herbs hovers over narrow stone streets. Merchants shout prices in sing-song voices, goats chew baskets they are supposed to carry, and pottery clinks like wind chimes every time someone bumps a stall. Hidden among the olives and amphorae are foods most modern people have never tasted, or even heard of. These were the everyday heroes of Greek kitchens 2,000 years ago, now banished to footnotes and archaeology reports. Back then, Greek cooks did not browse recipe blogs. They trusted what the land and sea gave them, plus a dash of daring. Their diet mixed the ordinary: figs, bread, wine, with specialty ingredients that could wow dinner guests, bribe politicians, or impress the gods during festivals. Some of those specialties vanished because empires fell. Others disappeared because the plants went extinct or the flavor scared off newcomers. It turns out history has a big trash bin, and a lot of supper ended up inside. Our first lost superstar is silphium, a golden-stemmed plant that grew only in a thin strip of North African soil. The Greeks loved it so much they stamped the shape of its heart-shaped seed on coins. They shaved bits off the resinous stalk to flavor meat, fish, and even dessert. Imagine garlic, fennel, and sunshine had a baby. That is what ancient writers claimed silphium tasted like. It was also a medicine, a perfume, and, according to racy poetry, a reliable love potion that kept unwanted babies from appearing 9 months later. The tragedy of silphium is how fast a favorite can disappear when everyone wants a bite. Farmers tried moving it to fresh fields, but the plant refused to grow anywhere else. Goats loved it, people loved it, and smugglers loved the profits. By the 1st century, silphium was gone. The Romans held a funeral feast for the last recorded stalk. Today, scientists argue whether it was a giant fennel or a lost cousin of carrot. Either way, imagine a spice so delicious your civilization eats it to death. Then imagine your spaghetti sauce without oregano forever. While silphium hogged the spotlight, humble lupin beans kept the working class alive. Greeks called them thermos. They boiled them, soaked them, then rinsed them again to wash away a natural bitterness that could numb your tongue. Once tamed, the beans tasted a little like chickpeas that went to the gym, firmer, meatier, ready to flex protein in every stew. Farmers loved lupins because they grew in worn-out soil and left it richer for next year's crops. Sailors carried sacks of them on long voyages, a crunchy backup plan when fish lines came up empty. Modern snack aisles show countless nuts wearing sunglasses and fancy flavors, while lupins hide in plain sight as cattle feed. Part of the blame? Time. It takes patience to soak and rinse, and most shoppers will not wait longer than a microwave cycle. Yet the bean is staging a quiet comeback among athletes and allergy dodgers. If you ever taste a modern lupin chip, remember you are sharing a snack with Spartan soldiers and island shepherds who trusted this bean to keep winter hunger from winning. Next comes mallow or malak, the greeter of Greek roadsides. Mallow thrives in cracked pavement today just as happily as it thrived in ancient stony fields. When rains were late, farmers had at least one green they could count on. The young leaves went into soups thick enough to stand a spoon upright. Old philosophers joked that if the gods kicked them out of Olympus, they would dine on mallow and still live well. That joke was partly envy. Mallow carries iron, calcium, and a gentle fiber that keeps a philosopher regular without pharmacy help. Most people see mallow as a weed now. We spray it with herbicides and complain it stains car tires. Meanwhile, health blogs buy expensive powders promising half the nutrition packed into the plant we trample. Ancient Greek grannies would cackle at that logic. They harvested mallow with one hand while rocking a cradle with the other, then stirred it into lentil mash so everyone slept full. The only complicated tool needed was a pot big enough to share. Honey has never vanished, but one Greek dessert that worshipped honey has slipped away. Melituta was a honey-soaked cheesecake before cheesecake had a marketing team. Bakers blended fresh goat cheese, ground barley, and wildflower honey, then wrapped the mix in fig leaves and baked it next to hot coals. When guests arrived, the host peeled away the leaves with theatrical flair, letting steam pour out like applause. Sweet, tangy, smoky, Melituta convinced men to propose marriage and neighbors to forget property lines. Why did Melituta fade? City ovens replaced hearths, and fig leaves stopped coming free with every backyard. Sugar from distant plantations elbowed honey out of wealthy pantries. Cheesecakes changed shape, stacking ingredients instead of blending them. The memory of Melituta lingered only in medical texts, praising it as a gentle laxative. Nothing kills romance faster than being called effective for bowel relief, so the cake retreated to monasteries where monks still whisper the recipe on feast days. Gyros, the Greek fish sauce, makes modern noses twitch before the jar opens. Think of it as the ancient sibling of Southeast Asian fish sauces, but louder and saltier. Fishermen layered small fish, herbs, and buckets of sea salt in clay vats, then left the sun to do its slow magic for months. The result smelled like Poseidon's laundry basket, yet tasted like liquid umami lightning. Cooks splashed gyros on everything. Bread crusts, boiled greens, even fruit, to spark flavor explosions nobody could explain, but everybody craved. When refrigeration arrived, gyros lost its survival niche. Competing sauces used quicker methods and fewer broken amphorae. Today, archaeologists identify old factories by the acidic stench trapped in soil layers. They wear masks, take notes, and secretly admit they might try a drop if time travel offers lunch. If you ever encounter a daring chef recreating gyros, bring a clothespin for your nose and an open mind for your tongue. Another forgotten staple is maza, the workhorse of grain. Maza was simply ground barley mixed with water or wine, then shaped into loaves, balls, or flat cakes. It could be soft as dough or hard as a travel biscuit tough enough to block arrows. Soldiers marched with maza in pouches, softening bites in broth at campfires. Field workers stashed it in tunics for a break between rows of vines. Rich families might drizzle honey and sesame over maza slices, turning poverty food into festival treats. Maza slipped from menus when wheat bread became cheap. Wheat rose lighter, looked whiter, and bragged about status the way marble columns bragged about wealth. Barley stayed bulky and old-fashioned. Add 2 millennia, and suddenly maza survives only in scholarly footnotes. Yet nutritionists now clap for barley's fiber and low gluten. Maybe maza just needs a rebrand. Call it Ancient Energy Bar, and millennials will pay triple. Sea fennel, or critamo, clings to cliffs where gulls gossip. Its fleshy leaves suck salt spray and convert it into crisp, lemon pepper flavor the Greeks adored. Sailors plucked bunches to fight scurvy, packing jars with critamo, vinegar, and olive oil. On land, cooks chopped it into tomato salad, turning ordinary produce into seaside vacation on a plate. The plant asked for nothing but enough daylight and a bit of risky climbing to harvest. Tourists snap photos of critamo these days without considering it edible. Regulations fence off many coastal plants, and grocery buyers fear anything not wrapped in plastic. So sea fennel keeps waving from cliffs, waiting for brave picnickers to remember the snack hiding in plain sight. If you ever taste it, chew slowly. That pop of brine is history high-fiving your palate. Next, we meet sapa, dark grape syrup the color of midnight ink. Farmers boiled grape must in bronze kettles until it thickened into a pourable caramel that tasted of raisins, smoke, and sunburned fruit. Sapa sweetened porridges, masks, and even medicines. Doctors mixed it with herbs to mask bitter cures. Children licked it off spoons when mothers turned their backs, making sapa the original cupboard raid. Why did sapa dim? White sugar barged in like a loud guest at a quiet wedding. Its clean sweetness was easier to measure, and plantation prophets shouted louder than small vineyard kettles. Some villages in Greece still simmer petimezi, the grandchild of sapa, but most people think it is exotic health food instead of daily bread topping. All it needs to rise again is a marketing slogan: solar-powered syrup, no blender required. Pterikos, the salted anchovy block, may hold the crown for ugliest delicious food. Fishermen packed anchovies head to tail into wooden boxes with layers of salt. Weeks later, The fish fused into a gray brick that could keep for months without spoiling. Buyers sliced Taricos like cheese and melted pieces into stews. The flavor exploded into broth the way firecrackers light a dark night. Suddenly, everything dances. Taricos stumbled in the age of glass jars and tiny tins. Familiar fillets in oil looked friendlier than a fish brick needing a saw. Yet chefs know Taricos offered something modern. Brined anchovies cannot. Depth. If your stew tastes flat, blame the missing Taricos and invite an archaeologist for dinner. Mastic resin. The teardrop jewels of the island of Chios. Flavored breath and legend. Harvesters scored pistacia trees so sap dripped like frozen raindrops onto white sand. Once hardened, the clear beads tasted piney at first, then blossomed into vanilla mint sweetness. Greeks chewed mastic as gum, crushed it into cakes, and stirred it into wine so fragrant it could make a poet write bad love odes. Mastic survives in niche liquors and fancy pastries, but plastic gum overshadowed its subtle charm. Supermarket shoppers pick flavors named after desserts that never melt, ignoring the natural chew that once freshened Socrates' afternoon chatter. No need to mourn, Chios still exports mastic. Just remember to chew gently. Bite too hard and the resin can threaten dental crowns older than Pericles. Kykeon was not so gentle. This barley mint potion fueled farmers and fueled mysteries. At its simplest, Kykeon blended ground barley, water, and fresh mint. Thirsty workers gulped it like sports drink on harvest days. But during the secret Eleusinian rites, priests added ergotized barley thought to spark visions of cosmic grain mothers. Participants swore by life-changing revelations they could never reveal, which is a clever way to keep people begging for tickets next year. When Christianity rose, the rites fell, and Kykeon's festive recipe faded. The everyday version lingered longer, but wine diluted with water stole the title of safest drink. Today, scientists study Kykeon to understand ancient mind trips. Athletes sip mint barley smoothies without knowing they follow Olympic ancestors. One truth stands: the simpler the drink, the more stories it can hide. Scorotheon onions packed heat like philosophical debate. Smaller than modern bulbs, they hid spicy fire in thin skins. Raw slices could clear sinuses faster than mountain air. Cooks pickled Scorotheon in vinegar and coriander seeds, then served them beside cheese and olives. A single bite woke up taste buds, friends, and probably neighbors 2 houses over. Hybrid onions grew fatter and milder, perfect for burgers but dull for mise plates. Scorotheon shrank to garden curiosities. Yet if you crave excitement in salad, plant these ancient bulbs, stand back, and let history punch your tongue, in a friendly way. Black figs, called Psycha melena, ripened late in the season, turning skins the shade of storm clouds. Inside they hid honeyed pulp that dripped as soon as you looked at it wrong. Farmers split them open and laid them on reed mats to dry into sticky coins that traveled better than any currency. Athletes chewed dried black figs between wrestling rounds. Philosophers nibbled them while arguing whether pleasure or virtue led to happiness. As trade routes widened, brighter figs selling pretty took shelf space. Black figs bruised easily and looked suspicious to customers chasing perfect produce. Yet those dark skins shield antioxidant treasures, proving once again that taste and health can share one outfit. If eyes judge by color, tongues miss the secret party. Sea urchin roe, or echinos, was ancient Greek butter for bread. Fishermen cracked spiny shells right on the dock, scooped bright orange roe, and spread it on barley rusks with a splash of lemon. The flavor balanced brine and cream, like the ocean made custard by accident. City folk paid extra for jars of packed roe at the agora, but coastal kids popped urchins like beach candy. Overfishing, pollution, and tourist feet crushing reefs cut echino's numbers. Today, gourmet restaurants serve small spoonfuls at high prices, forgetting grandmothers used it as toddler snack. The lesson? Protect the sea pantry before the only urchins left are plastic souvenirs. Sideritis, mountain tea, grew on rocky slopes goats considered too dangerous. Shepherds picked the gray-green stems, tied them in bundles, and brewed them into herbal tea that tasted of citrus and thyme. The drink warmed bones, soothed coughs, and filled evenings with steam curling like smoke signals. Some believed it healed wounds from iron weapons, hence the name sideritis, plant of iron. Coffee bulldozed its way into breakfast cups, pushing mountain tea to souvenir shelves. Yet scientists now discover sideritis fights inflammation and lifts mood. The goats always knew. Sometimes following animals' snack choices leads to good science and better evenings. Pollen bread or melipoma combined ground pollen, fig paste, and crushed nuts into chewy bars that Olympic runners swore made legs lighter. Beekeepers shook pollen from hive traps before the word supplement existed. Honeyed pollen bars tasted floral and nutty, like springtime shrunk into pocket size. Victors thanked the gods and the bees equally. Modern energy gels skip pollen for easier sugars, and regulations frown on harvesting too much from bees. Pollen bread survives in scattered villages during feast days. If you see a small round bar flecked like confetti, buy it. Your cardio session will thank the ancients. Wild purslane glystrida slithered between vineyard rows with succulent leaves that popped like tiny water balloons. Housewives snipped whole mats of it to pickle in brine or toss raw with cucumber. Hippocrates wrote that purslane cooled fevers. Cooks liked it because vines ignored droughts. Children liked it because you could fling the stems like tiny whips when chores got boring. Purslane revived as a trendy omega-3 green, yet most gardeners still yank it out thinking it is a weed. Imagine pulling up free salmon-level nutrition and throwing it away. That is exactly what we do while paying for lettuce shipped from far deserts. The Greeks would tilt their laurel wreaths in disbelief. Cracked wheat porridge called trichanas blended fermented milk with parboiled wheat, dried into pebbles that rattled in jars. Winter arrived, mothers dropped handfuls into boiling water, and thick soup formed faster than you can say, drive-through. The slight tang reminds modern palates of sourdough crossed with grits. Trichanas filled bellies, cured sniffles, and convinced even picky toddlers to nap. City life replaced home fermentation with store noodles, but trichanas still rustles in rural pantries. One sniff of steam and you are back to a hillside cottage where snow stays outside, and stories grow longer every time the ladle passes the pot. Caperberries, capparis, sprouted from stone walls like green fireworks. Harvesters climbed ladders at dawn to pinch buds before flowers burst. Pickled capers added explosions of sour, salty kick to fish stews and goat cheese. Conquests came and went, but caper bushes stayed rooted in mortar crevices, proving resilience tastes delicious. Imported pickles overshadowed local buds, yet caper vines keep waving from fortress walls, daring anyone to rediscover their punch. If you stumble upon a ruin crawling with green dots, bring a jar of vinegar and a brave heart. Finally, we honor acorn bread, Dricinos artos, survival loaf of poor villages and remote islands. Acorns from evergreen oaks were leached in running water to remove bitterness, then ground with barley into dough dense enough to stop a Spartan spear. The bread tasted nutty and slightly sweet, perfect with fig jam if you had any left. In famine years, acorn bread kept whole regions alive when grain convoys never arrived. Wheat abundance pushed acorn bread into memory's attic. Oak forests turned into picnic spots instead of granaries. But climate shifts remind farmers of hearty staples. Some bakeries now mix acorn flour with wheat for gluten-light loaves that echo campfires of ancestors. The lesson is simple. Foods once scorned as poor man's dinner may rescue future tables. All these lost or fading Greek foods tell one story. The pantry of the past overflowed with variety, courage, and local wisdom. The tongue that tasted silphium, maza, garos, and melituta kept memory alive long enough for archaeologists to dig it back up. Maybe tomorrow's cooks will rescue mountain tea from souvenir racks and plant sea fennel along balconies. History is just old menus waiting for a table reservation, and we still have seats left. Ever wondered how ancient Greeks didn't just melt beneath that relentless Mediterranean sun or shiver when the rare cold spell rolled over the Aegean? They had no air conditioners, no electric fans, and definitely no cozy fleece blankets shipped overnight from an online store. Yet somehow the citizens of Athens, Sparta, Corinth, and every little coastal village in between kept their cool, literally, and still managed to throw the best symposiums the world has ever seen. Their secret? A grab bag of clever tricks that turned blistering summers and damp winters into manageable bumps on the rocky road of daily life, all while looking effortlessly stylish in linen chitons that would make a modern influencer jealous. Let's peek at their houses first, because Greek architecture wasn't just about marble columns big enough to make your neck ache from staring upward. The typical home of a middling Athenian was a low two-story rectangle built from sun-dried mud brick and chunks of stone scavenged from whichever hillside was closest. Those walls might sound flimsy, but they acted like giant clay coolers, thick enough to absorb midday heat, then slowly release it once the evening breeze arrived. Builders mixed crushed pottery shards into the mud, giving each wall a built-in ventilation system of microscopic tunnels that wicked away moisture like an ancient dehumidifier. Add a coat of glaring white lime wash that bounced sunlight straight back to Helios, and the inside felt surprisingly comfortable even when the agora outside simmered like a frying pan. Every house, rich or poor, revolved around an open courtyard called the Owl. Picture a roofless square lined with shady colonnades, a pomegranate tree in one corner, and maybe a terracotta altar smudged with yesterday's sacrifices to Hestia. In summer, the courtyard acted as a thermal chimney. Hot air rose and escaped up the middle, sucking cooler air through narrow doorways at ground level. Families arranged their spinning, weaving, and gossip sessions here during the afternoon siesta, so the breeze could drift right over their sweaty foreheads. By nightfall, that same courtyard became a pocket of chilled air, perfect for rolling out straw mats and dozing beneath constellations the Greeks had already turned into myths. Roofs were another stroke of genius. Those neat rows of curved terracotta tiles you see on recreated Greek towns weren't chosen just because they looked good on pottery. Air pockets beneath each tile trapped a cushion of insulation, while the curved channels guided rainwater toward cisterns tucked underneath the courtyard. That stored water doubled as an ancient evaporative cooler. A family could hoist a ceramic jar, splash the flagstones, and let the breeze carry a mist of freshness across the whole house. Wealthier homeowners went one step further, installing shallow reflecting pools whose surfaces exhaled cool vapor like permanent silent fountains, nature's version of a desktop USB humidifier. Now, the Greeks did know a thing or two about winter, especially in northern regions like Thessaly, where mountain winds bite harder than a Spartan drill instructor. When temperatures dipped, families sealed shutters with thin marble slabs or oiled leather flaps. Hearths shifted from the courtyard to a central room called the oikos, where a portable brazier of charcoal glowed red under a bronze tripod. The trick was location. The brazier sat low so heated air could swirl upward, ricochet off the ceiling beams, and settle gently on anyone lounging against the walls. Ashes were saved and layered between floor tiles for extra insulation, and on especially damp nights, someone might shove a clay pot filled with embers beneath the dining couch, toasting guests' toes while they argued about the nature of virtue. Daily schedules were timed with precision that would shame a modern smartwatch. Dawn's first rosy fingers meant it was cool enough for farm work or market haggling, but the real sweet spot was late morning before Apollo's chariot started blasting the stones. Around noon, shutters clapped shut, shady porticos filled with people napping in breezy silence, and the whole city slowed to a crawl. Locals called this break the Mesembria, but you can call it the oldest siesta on record. After the sun slunk past its peak, artisans reopened their workshops and kids dashed back into alleys chasing hoops, all while long shadows stretched like sundials, reminding everyone how much daylight was left before the evening symposium bells chimed. Let's talk food, because no civilization fueled so many philosophers on an empty stomach. Instead of giant fridges humming in every kitchen, Greeks turned to amphorae, those pointy-bottomed clay jars you picture on shipwreck documentaries. Grain got stored bone-dry with sprigs of wild thyme that naturally repelled pests. Olives bathed under a blanket of oil, sealing out air better than any plastic wrap. Fish were salted until they rivaled modern potato chips for sodium, then packed into wooden barrels oozing garum, a fermented sauce so funky citizens joked it needed its own vote in the assembly. In rural Attica, farmers buried pumpkin-sized pithoi half-deep in the earth. Temperatures down there hovered around 50 degrees Fahrenheit year-round, keeping figs leathery, cheese tangy, and onions crisp until the first spring flowers coaxed everyone back to fresh greens. Cooking centered on a clay hearth that looked like an upside-down bowl with a hole in the top. Families kept a stew called maza, or trajamata, simmering for days. Barley, lentils, herbs, and whatever scraps yesterday's dinner left behind. Guests simply ladled more water, tossed in fresh veggies, and kept the flavor rolling. Archaeologists scraping carbonized residue from 2,400-year-old pots discovered layers like tree rings, barley at the bottom, chickpea mush above, and a final skim of olive oil sealing everything from air. That perpetual stew killed bacteria by staying just hot enough to ward off spoilage, a slow-cooking brother to the medieval pottage you heard about earlier. Nothing said survival like fermentation. Wine was their breakfast smoothie, lunch drink, and evening toast. Villages stomped grapes in stone vats, funneled the juice into huge clay jars, and capped them with pine resin. The resin wasn't just flavor. It plugged microscopic holes, creating a semi-airtight seal so the wine stayed fresh through blistering summers and damp winters. Even table scraps got a second life. Farmers in the Cyclades buried cabbage under sand, turning it into a tangy pickle that paired beautifully with dried goat sausage. Talk about zero-waste cuisine 2 millennia before sustainability became a buzzword. Of course, fashion helped regulate body temperature as much as any architecture trick. Greeks worshipped linen, like a modern athlete worships moisture-wicking polyester. Flax fibers, spun thin and left unbleached, produced a fabric light enough to flap in the faintest breeze. On chill nights or during winter sea squalls, folks layered wool himacha over their linen chitons. They never washed wool in hot water because that would felt the fibers into a lumpy blanket. Instead, they aired garments in salty sea wind, letting natural lanolin repel moisture and odors. Some even rubbed olive oil mixed with crushed bay leaves into the cloth, creating a water-resistant glaze that smelled like an herbal spa. Headgear was essential. The wide-brimmed patassos wasn't a fashion statement for traveling poets. It cast a circle of shade that functioned like personal portable awning. For feet, thin leather sandals laced halfway up the calf allowed maximum airflow and minimal contact with sizzling flagstones. Soldiers marching across sun-baked Asia Minor wore thick felt insoles dusted with powdered charcoal, a low-tech version of temperature-regulating shoe inserts sold at outdoor stores today. Sleeping habits also reveal their engineering smarts. City families slept on wooden frames woven with leather straps or rope. Those lattice beds acted like suspension bridges for your spine, springy, breathable, and light enough to drag into the courtyard on summer nights when indoor rooms felt oppressive. In the countryside, people shared raised platforms packed with straw and dried asphodel leaves that warded off insects. Parents in the middle, kids near the edges ready to sprint for midnight chores, older grandparents tucked closest to the hearth where warmth lingered. Everyone lay slightly propped on cylindrical pillows, so cool night air brushed cheeks without whooshing straight into lungs, cutting down on the coughs that Spartan doctors blamed on sleeping too flat. Animals played sidekick too. During winter storms, shepherds corralled sheep beneath stilted bedrooms, letting 100 pounds of bleeding body heat drift upward through floorboards. Villagers near Mount Olympus herded goats into stone-lined corridors that doubled as windbreaks. The animals' warm breath circulated along sloped ceilings, while manure layered with straw fermented, releasing a slow stream of bonus heat. To keep smells down, families sprinkled beds of crushed seashells and wood ash that soaked up ammonia faster than a box of modern cat litter. Water management deserves applause. Greeks harvested winter rain from tiled roofs, funneled it through terracotta pipes, and stored it in plaster-sealed cisterns buried like giant eggs below courtyard floors. Drawing buckets hauled up cool water even at high noon. To chill wine, diners dunked amphorae in the cistern or wrapped them in wet linen and left them on shady verandas. As the moisture evaporated, it leached heat from the jar, dropping the wine's temperature by a satisfying couple of degrees. Think of it as the ancestor of the electric cooler you lugged to beach picnics. Community spaces multiplied these household hacks. Public bathhouses weren't just for scrubbing off road dust. They used solar-heated water stored in blackened tanks, so soaking at twilight felt like slipping into a giant teacup. Gymnasia lined with tall plane trees offered an avenue of perpetual shade, channeling canyon-like drafts that cooled athletes after wrestling matches. Market stalls erected striped awnings angled to bounce morning sun onto produce, ripening fruit without cooking the merchants underneath. The agora itself functioned as an open-air thermostat. Civic planners laid the paving stones in light and dark patterns. Heat rising from darker stripes pushed cooler air across paler ones, creating gentle eddies you could feel on sandal-clad feet. Council chambers, meanwhile, featured double-door vestibules where citizens shook off dust and heat before stepping inside echoing rooms whose high ceilings trapped warm breath overhead, leaving the debate floor pleasantly temperate for long speeches about naval budgets. Festivals doubled as seasonal checkpoints. When almond blossoms popped in late February, priests of Demeter signaled farmers to prune grapevines, a job best done before sap rose and afternoon heat baked workers' shoulders. By July, when cicadas screamed loud enough to drown out philosophical arguing, coastal towns hosted nighttime processions lit by olive oil lamps. The moving glow kept streets safe while participants soaked in the cooler evening air. After harvest, communal grain piles became neighborhood air fresheners as chaff burned in shallow pits gave off aromatic smoke that also shooed away mosquitoes fat with summer mischief. Storage trickery never ended. Tall granaries made of sun-baked brick stood on mushroom-shaped stone stilts called pissoi, impossible for rats to climb. Ventilation slots carved in zigzag patterns let wind snake through barley without letting water sneak in. Pottery workshops produced double-walled jars. In summer, slaves poured water between layers so evaporation chilled inner wine, while in winter they plugged the gap with wool scraps to guard against frost. Some households even buried sealed amphorae in seabed mud along shallow coasts, knowing the constant temperature of submerged sand kept olive oil fresh and fish sauce mellow until someone paddled out to retrieve dinner ingredients. Labor was organized with military precision. Villages divided citizens into eranos crews responsible for tasks like olive picking, grape pressing, or wood cutting on rotating shifts tied to lunar cycles. If your team skipped its turn, the village assembly fined you an entire amphora of wine, or worse, a front-row seat next to the loudest philosopher at the next festival. Everyone knew the stakes. One missed pressing, and a year's harvest could spoil. So even the laziest cousin got hauled out of bed before dawn, when an appointed herald clanged a bronze cymbal under each doorway. The city planners of Rhodes introduced an urban layout so grid-perfect you could time walking errands by counting street crossings. Homes staggered in height to avoid blocking each other's breezes, and alleys aligned with the Etesian winds that blew from the sea each afternoon. Residents likened it to living inside a giant wind instrument, every building a flute hole channeling air to where people gathered most. Meanwhile, country estates near Corinth dug shallow trenches around orchards. At dawn, cold air pooled low, keeping figs crisp until harvest, and by afternoon, the trenches radiated stored coolness back toward sun-drenched vine rows. Light itself was a tool. During blazing midsummer, families swapped thick wooden shutters for reed blinds smeared with diluted clay. Sunlight slipping through the reeds scattered into soft gold tones that brightened rooms without turning them into ovens. At dusk, olive oil lamps provided steady glow but minimal heat. Wicks twisted from papyrus burned cool, letting households finish weaving or reading scrolls without sweating through their tunics. Medicine chimed into the climate choreography. Hippocratic doctors recommended seasonal diets, watery gruels and honeyed melon in dog star season, dense barley cakes and boiled cabbage when Orion rose. They advised sleeping with feet toward the breeze to prevent fevers, and prescribed simple breath exercises under plane trees to train lungs against dusty wind. Their patient instructions read like a crossover between a weather forecast and a yoga class, but they kept epidemics low enough for the population to boom. Entertainment slotted neatly into thermal rhythms, too. Tragedies at the Dionysia began just after sunset, when theater benches of limestone finally stopped sizzling. Torches lining the aisles were dipped in salt water beforehand, so their flames burned bright without crackling sparks into the audience's hair. Vendors sold chilled wine diluted with snow carted down from Parnassus. Yes, Greeks invented the first snow cones, and rough-fired mugs that sweat condensation on grateful hands. When winter brought rain, smaller dramas moved indoors to covered Odeia, whose timber ceilings arched like upside-down ships, acoustics perfect for echoing every tragic sigh. Even warfare obeyed climate sense. Hoplites trained at dawn and dusk, leaving midday for equipment repairs under shade. Armories stored bronze cuirasses wrapped in wool to prevent sun glare that could roast skin or blind comrades during formation practice. Strategoi scheduled campaigns for spring and autumn, when supply wagons could travel without turning roads into muddy rivers or dusty furnaces. If an unlucky siege dragged into high summer, commanders ordered trenches dug around tents and filled with seawater. Evaporative cooling turned the encampment into a passable oasis, though mosquitoes probably thought it was a five-star buffet. Religious rituals mirrored agricultural ones. At night-long mysteries of Eleusis, initiates carried torches dipped in fragrant resin, whose smoke kept evening chill at bay beside sacred caves. Temple priests stored sacrificial meat in underground adita, where limestone kept offerings safe from both heat and stray dogs until morning feasts. Stone altars often faced east, so dawn's first warmth dried blood quickly, discouraging insects and smells long before solar noon cooked the marble. Not to be outdone, philosophers scheduled public lectures under colonnades angled to collect ocean breezes. Socrates famously chatted barefoot in winter, but don't let that fool you. He picked south-facing stoas where low sun could warm stone floors like a heated mosaic. Students formed semicircles that funneled wind behind them, letting the master's voice carry while everyone's cloaks flapped just enough to keep eyelids alert during dense talk of forms and virtues. Turns out, even dialectic banter works better at a perfect room temperature. Kids absorbed these hacks early. Boys apprenticed in wrestling schools where trainers sprinkled sand wetted with seawater. As trainees pummeled each other, the damp grit evaporated, cooling feet and preventing blisters. Girls weaving indoors learned to keep clay mixing bowls half buried in shaded earth, so thread glue stayed tacky but didn't spoil. In seaside villages, children earned pocket change, fanning fish-drying racks with giant palm leaves, essentially living wind machines ensuring tomorrow's dinner wouldn't rot under the sun. And what about travel? Merchants sailing wine from Lesbos to Athens coated amphorae with translucent pitch mixed with powdered marble. The pitch reflected sunlight, while the marble particles worked like tiny parasols, keeping wine palatable even after days baking on deck. Couriers on dusty roads wore sleeveless chitons, but draped lightweight hematia across shoulders soaked in river water. Evaporative cooling turned each stride into a micro-breeze across skin. They even tucked mint sprigs behind ear straps so every inhale felt icy, proof that ancient hacks can outdo expensive modern sports gels. Olive presses, the heartbeats of rural estates, operated mostly at night. Workers crushed fruit when temperatures dipped, avoiding oil spoilage from midday heat. Wooden beams creaked under moonlight as donkeys trudged in circles, their breath making little clouds that hovered like ghosts above stone basins. Finished oil went straight into cool cellars, where amphorae stacked in perfect quincunx patterns left narrow air channels for inspection and cleaning. Managers tallied gallons by scratch marks on pillars, trusting steel-sharp memories more than papyrus that might warp in humidity. Finally, let's not ignore noise as a climate tool. Wind chimes of bronze dangling from temple eaves weren't just decorative. They rang when gusts picked up, cueing priests to open or close roof vents inside sacred halls. Farmers in Crete hung strings of seashells along vineyard rows. Rattling shells warned that evening breezes strong enough to damage tender leaves had arrived, prompting quick covering with woven mats. Even the supposed idle gossip of women at communal wells spread weather intel faster than any written decree, because chatting about how many cicadas you counted at dawn could inform everyone whether to hurry grape harvest or expect rain. So next time you picture ancient Greeks lounging on marble steps thinking big thoughts about democracy and destiny, remember the invisible genius swirling around them, mud brick walls that breathed, sea-cooled pottery, alleyways aligned with the wind, and a schedule tuned tighter than a lyre string to the rhythms of sun, sea, and stone. They didn't just survive that capricious Mediterranean climate, they turned it into an ally, proving that a little observation, a lot of experimentation, and a healthy respect for natural forces can keep a whole civilization comfortable enough to invent theater, philosophy, and pizza's great-grandfather, all while wearing sandals that never, ever left socks inside a laundry basket. Think your grocery bill feels heavy today? The average farmer in ancient Greece carried that weight every single sunrise. Long before supermarkets and stainless steel kitchens, they had to stay alive with whatever sprouted on rocky terraces or swam past a worn-out net. These 20 plain meals weren't fancy, but they powered hoplite marches, Olympic dreams, and back-breaking vineyard work for centuries. First on any list is maza, the food that stuck to both ribs and history. Imagine a porridge so loyal it followed you from cradle to grave. Barley flour, a splash of water, a pinch of salt, then a slow stir over coals. That was it. Thick enough to cut, soft enough to swallow without teeth, maza was breakfast, lunch, and emergency snack tucked inside a cloak. The pot never really emptied. Fresh flour went in as spoonfuls came out, turning every meal into yesterday plus tomorrow. Why barley and not shiny white wheat? Wheat cost money and grew only in river plains owned by magistrates. Barley thrived on sunburned hillsides where poor people lived. It cooked faster, filled bellies longer, and mixed politely with any crumb of flavor that wandered past. Crushed onions, dried oregano, even leftover wine lees. Archaeologists scraping ancient hearths keep finding the same gray crust, proof that maza rarely took a holiday. When maza felt lonely, it invited kaikion to the party. Kaikion started as barley gruel thinned with water or leftover wine, then perked up with grated cheese or wild mint. Homer gives it to weary heroes. Farmers gave it to sweaty children. Simmered just long enough to chase raw grain taste away, kaikion worked like an edible thermos, warm in winter, lukewarm in summer, always ready for another dip of the cup. Bread still mattered, even if it wasn't the soft white cloud you picture. The common loaf, krithinos ardos, came out coarse, dark, and stubbornly round. Women kneaded the dough at dawn, shaped hand-sized discs, and slapped them straight onto a clay wall inside dome ovens shared by several families. By sunset, the crust could chip a tooth, so people dunked chunks into broth or watered wine before chewing. Rich citizens nibbled wheat placus sweetened with honey. Everyone else just watched the crumbs fall. Lentil soup, called fake, formed the democratic backbone of supper. A pot of brown lentils, water, a drizzle of oil, and maybe garlic if the gods were smiling. That was enough protein to swing a sickle all day. Comic poets joked that lentils were fit only for paupers, but estates kept sacks of them in storage because lentils didn't spoil and could resurrect an appetite faster than a temple prayer. Chickpeas and broad beans tagged along too. Some were boiled soft for stews, others roasted until they popped like ancient popcorn. Street vendors in Athens sold cones of warm chickpeas to noisy theater crowds, the classical version of halftime peanuts. Farmers loved legumes for another reason. Their roots fixed nitrogen, healing tired soil after barley robbed it bare. Plant peas, eat peas, rest the land. Everybody won. If ancient Greece had a flavor, it tasted like olives. Black, green, wrinkled, stuffed, or mashed olives showed up at every sitting. A handful with bread made a meal. Pressed into oil, they became liquid sunshine stored in clay amphorae. One small cup of olive oil packed more calories than a whole bowl of barley, a lifesaver during lean months. Households even burned lower-grade oil in lamps, so supper light came from the same tree that supplied supper fat. Sweetness wore a fig's skin. Fresh figs dripped nectar in late summer. Dried figs kept sailors and shepherds company through winter. Taxes sometimes demanded baskets of figs, proving how much the state valued them. Children traded fig halves the way modern kids swap candy, and a traveler could cross half of Attica living on figs and nothing else. Or so the old stories claim. Greens called horta filled any empty corner of the table. Dandelion, chicory, purslane. If it grew between stones and wasn't poisonous, someone boiled it. Gatherers, mostly women, knew more than 50 edible weeds by sight. Spring mornings saw lines of bent backs combing hillsides, turning free weeds into vitamin baskets long before scurvy had a name. Water was risky, wine was safer. Even the poorest households mixed a thin wine called oinos with 3 parts water and called it krasi. The brief boil during fermentation killed the nasties no one could see, and a splash of acidity masked stale flavors. Symposium tales talk of strong wine, but farmhands drank light stuff all day without wobbling, the ancient version of small beer. Grape presses dotted every village. After the sweet must drained, skins and seeds still fragrant got tossed into a side jar to make vinegar, or poor man's grappa called piquette. Nothing wasted, ever. Boys stomped grapes barefoot, laughing until bees chased them into the shade. 6 months later, they drank the memory from smoky clay cups. Fish followed the salt road. Fresh catch like tuna cost more than a goat, but little fish cured in brine, taricos, sold cheap. Sellers strung them on reeds, dripping saltwater down the agora steps. A single salty shard crumbled over maza could fool a hungry stomach into thinking it tasted the whole sea. Plays set in Athens crack jokes about the smell of taricos stalls wafting all the way to Piraeus. Goats were the mountain people's bank account. Hardy, nimble, and happy to eat weeds sheep rejected, goats gave milk that turned into tangy cheese within hours. Soft when fresh, crumbly when aged, goat cheese traveled tucked in fig leaves. A slice on barley bread upgraded breakfast from fuel to pleasure, at least for a minute. Honey acted as the islanders' sugar bowl. Beekeepers kept hives in hollow logs smeared with clay. Raiding wild combs meant smoke in your eyes and stingers down your tunic, but a clay jar of honey could last decades. Honey glazed nuts, healed cuts, and sweetened diluted wine for sick elders. When city folks tasted foreign cane sugar centuries later, they still called it new honey. Nuts strengthened winter menus. Almond trees lined field borders, promising protein snacks during plow breaks. Walnuts, hazelnuts, even pine kernels offered quick energy and stored better than bread. Carob pods, long brown and sweetish, got ground into powder to stretch barley flour, fooling children into thinking cake was on the way. It usually wasn't. Festival stew proved creativity knows no menu. During harvest Thanksgivings, neighbors pooled leftovers into a cauldron big enough to drown a helmet. Barley, beans, greens, cheese rinds, herbs, the tale of yesterday's goat. Everything cooked until flavors forgot where they started. No recipe, no rules, just community disguised as supper. Daily eating rhythm ran on suntime. Workers grabbed a nibble of cold maza at dawn called akratisma, then sweated through fields until ariston, a midday bite of bread, olives, maybe onions. Real eating waited for nightfall. Deepnon, the main meal, unfolded after stars blinked awake. A long sit on straw mats around a low table, joints aching, lamps flickering, stories rising with steam from the stew. Sieges and droughts demanded harsher tricks. When grain stores emptied, people baked ember cakes. Barley paste slapped straight into hot ashes. Dust brushed off, still gritty between teeth. Wooden siege tokens found in Athens list daily rations of 2 such cakes per soldier, proof that survival doesn't pause for flavor. Nothing escaped the use-it-anyway rule. Grape leaves too tough for eating wrapped leftover beans to make travel packs. The whey left from cheese-making soured into a drinkable yogurt called oxygal. Even broken pottery found a second life, storing salted fish or lining earth floors. Waste was an insult to Demeter, goddess of grain. Nobody dared. Roasted snails crawled onto plates in coastal hills. Kids collected them after rain. Grandparents purged them on bran, then tossed them on hot tiles until shells cracked. Dipped in garlic oil, snails tasted like land shrimp, a sentence no modern menu dares print, yet fed many a Spartan outpost. Wild birds sometimes replaced expensive meat. Thrushes caught in nets got skewered whole and grilled over vine twigs. Bones crunched, beaks too. Athenian markets sold them by the dozen, cheaper than chicken, quicker than goat. Rich diners peeled them daintily. Peasants just closed teeth and hoped for no surprise grit. Seaweed saved islanders during storm months when boats stayed beached. Red dulse washed, sun-dried, and fried on a flat stone offered iodine and salt a body craved. Fishermen chewed it like jerky while mending nets, a tradition still whispered on remote Aegean coves. Acorn meal hid bitterness through patience. Women boiled crushed acorns again and again, changing water until tannins fled, then dried the mush into hard cakes stored for emergencies. Poems warned city boys not to mock acorn bread, because one bad harvest can turn laughter into hunger fast. Herbs made the difference between endurance and enjoyment. Thyme for courage, sage for sore throats, dill for fish. Tiny leaves swung taste upward without costing a drachma. Children learned plant names the way they learned myths because both kept you alive in different ways. Leftovers never died, they reincarnated. Yesterday's lentil soup thickened overnight, rolled into patties, and fried on a shard of iron, becoming fake meatballs for breakfast. Stale bread cubed into broth acted like new dumplings. Olive pits fueled hearth embers, heating the new pot that welcomed the old food in a circle older than coins. Hard bread called paximati deserves its own story. Bakers sliced loaves after the first bake, returned them to the oven, and cooked them a second time until every drop of moisture vanished. The result could survive months at sea or years in a storeroom. Sailors cracked paximati on a mast and soaked the shards in seawater to make them chewable. Farmers carried chunks in leather pouches, refreshing them with goat milk on the hillside. Even philosophers traveling between city-states gnawed on this ancient biscuit, mumbling crisp thoughts. Eggs walked into the diet whenever hens cooperated. Backyard chickens scratched for bugs, and each egg became a tiny treasure of protein. Hard-boiled eggs traveled well and often appeared as midday field snacks. Some cooks whisked eggs into steaming broth, creating avgolemino long before recipe scrolls named it. Temples collected egg taxes, counting them carefully before passing them to priests, who sold the surplus back at marketplace stalls, an early lesson in circular economics. Sesame seeds played the role of pocket candy. Toasted and mixed with honey, they formed pastelli bars that kept athletes energized through long training sessions. Ancient trainers believed sesame fed muscle and warmed the blood. Harvesting sesame meant shaking dry pods until seeds rained out like gritty snow, then winnowing them in a breeze. A single amphora of sesame oil traded for enough wool to clothe a household, making the crop both snack and savings account. Spices were modest but meaningful. Cooks crushed cumin, coriander, and fennel in stone mortars, releasing aromas that tricked the brain into thinking meat was present, even when only beans simmered. Pepper was rare and expensive, but penny-pinching wives learned that pennyroyal added a sharp bite almost for free. Theophilos, a comic playwright, once quipped that a poor man's stew smelled richer than it tasted, a nod to spices doing heavy lifting in empty pans. Garlic and onions refused to stay in the ground. They pushed their way into almost every dish, raw with vinegar as salad, roasted whole beside embers, or dried into braids hanging from rafters. Soldiers chewed raw garlic before marches, claiming it strengthened legs and terrified enemies with the smell. City elites mocked the country stink, yet still paid silver for garlic remedies when coughs refused to leave. Cooking fuel decided the menu as much as ingredients. Olive wood burned slow and hot. Vine cuttings flared fast for quick sears. Mountain folk used goat dung mixed with straw, shaped into patties, and sun-dried, cheap briquettes that kept kettles humming. Managing fuel mattered because wasting it meant uncooked dinners. Even ashes found second-duty whitening cloth or fertilizing fields. Religious calendars shaped eating habits. On purification days before festivals, communities practiced partial fasts. No meat, limited oil, plenty of barley gruel. After sacrifices, the rules flipped. The choicest organs and fatty cuts charred for the gods, while worshippers shared the rest on reed mats around the altar. For many villagers, festival meat was their only taste of pork or beef all season, a reminder that heaven controlled the menu as surely as soil did. Seasonal swings kept cooks guessing. Spring offered goat kids tender enough to roast whole. Summer overflowed with cucumbers, melons, and fresh herbs. Autumn filled storerooms with grapes, pomegranates, apples, and cured meats. Winter tested every jar, barrel, and string of dried goods. Surviving until the first almond blossoms opened became an annual contest of planning versus luck. Travelers relied on compact foods: dried figs, paximati, hard cheese, and a skin of diluted wine formed the standard road ration. Couriers for the city-state could jog 50 miles in a day, fueled by a handful of these dense calories. Messages moved as fast as the food that carried them. Calorie needs were huge. A vine pruner swung a curved knife for 10 hours, climbing stone terraces that turned ankles daily. Scholars estimate a farmhand burned 3,500 to 4,000 calories before sundown. That's why barley dominated plates. It was cheap energy you could grow yourself. A single acre, well managed, produced enough grain to feed a family of 4 through a median year, assuming no hail, mildew, or tax collector arrived first. Dairy beyond cheese showed up in short windows. Sheep milk curdled within hours in Mediterranean heat, so most drank it fresh at dawn or not at all. Yogurt like oxymel evolved from mixing sour milk with honey and herbs, creating a tangy drink athletes believed cooled the body. Butter was almost unknown. Any milk fat went straight into cheese, which survived shipping to market better than a melting pat of gold. Pigs turned garbage into bacon. Even cramped courtyards kept a runt piglet that feasted on peelings and stale bread. When autumn came, villagers slaughtered together, sharing tools and smoking meat over slow fires of figwood. Blood mixed with barley to make sausages similar to Spartan melis zomos, though the famous black broth used pig legs, vinegar, and salt, proof that even warriors could eat like peasants when discipline demanded. Markets stitched these foods together. Agora stalls sold yesterday's fish at dawn, fruit at noon, and leftover cakes at dusk. Haggling filled the air like cicada song. Housewives pinched loaves to test moisture, sniffed jars for rancid oil, and tasted olives before paying. A smart shopper stretched 1 drachma into 2 days of dinners. A careless one went home with moldy beans and a lighter purse. Children learned frugality early. Small hands collected pine resin to seal wine jars, peeled reeds for basket ties, and counted lentils spilled on the floor. Play often imitated work. Little girls stirred imaginary pots with stick spoons. Boys built clay ovens for lizard roasts. Hunger taught math too. Splitting a single pomegranate 5 ways required quick mental division no abacus provided. Medical writers linked food and mood. Hippocrates advised that barley softens a harsh temper, while too many fava beans cloud the mind. Peasants followed folk wisdom instead. If a meal made you feel strong the next morning, cook it again. If it sent you running to the bushes, feed it to the goats. Observation beat theory every time. Salt remained the silent hero. Quarry workers carved chunks from coastal pans. Traders hauled sacks inland on donkey caravans. Without salt, olives rotted, fish spoiled, cheese festered, and people collapsed in the summer heat. So valuable was salt that some cities paid mercenaries partly in salarium, a root word still hiding in salary today. A pinch of salt in a pot equaled an insurance policy against bitter surprises. When all else failed, hope still simmered. A mother could stretch a ladle of bean mash by adding water and promises, telling children that tomorrow the sea might calm and the boats would return full. Ancient Greek resilience was a recipe with only 3 ingredients: patience, ingenuity, and the faith that spring would follow even the wettest winter. Dessert may sound like a luxury, yet every culture finds a way. Greek farm cooks fried spoonfuls of thin batter in shallow oil to make loukoumades, tiny golden clouds dunked in honey if any remained. Festivals handed them out to victors, children, and gods alike because even Zeus was rumored to like a sweet crunch. On leaner days, the same batter minus honey turned into plain fritters, reminding everyone that luxury and simplicity ride the same pan. Grape pomace, the pulpy heap left after pressing wine, rarely went to waste. Cooks shaped the sticky mash into flat cakes, dried them on roof tiles, and served them as winter chew toys for shepherds. Slightly sweet, faintly boozy, these pomace cakes kept jaws busy during long nights guarding flocks from wolves. They also supplied trace vitamins missing from an otherwise beige season of barley and beans. Generosity anchored social life. A stranger at the door received bread, olives, and a cup of diluted wine before questions even started. The sacred law of Xenia. Refusing to feed a traveler risked angering the gods, who loved to walk the world in disguise. In practice, this meant households kept an emergency stash, usually a jar of olives, a strip of dried fish, and some paximati, ready at all times. Many families slept a little hungrier, so they could offer that first bite to someone who might be more than mortal. Sharing food forged alliances, settled feuds, and turned isolated farms into threads of a wider tapestry that stretched from the mountains of Thessaly to the shores of Crete. Do you think your life is hard? You wouldn't last a single day in ancient Greece. Modern comforts has made us soft, and what the ancient Greeks dealt with daily would shock you to your core. By the time the sun crawled over the dusty hills of Attica, the smell alone could knock you flat. Think roasted goat fat, fermented wine gone bad, and a solid hint of fish left in the sun too long. Welcome to ancient Greece, where breakfast begins with olives, gossip, and a nose full of raw humanity. If your stomach is already twisting, perfect. You're ready for our first Greek shocker. In most city-states, the morning bathroom dash meant grabbing a clay pot called a kytra, squatting and hoping you didn't tip it over your own sandals. Public latrines existed, but they were social hangouts the way modern folks treat coffee shops. Imagine 20 neighbors in a row, no dividing walls, everyone chatting about yesterday's wrestling match while doing their business. Toilet paper? The standard kit was a handful of pebbles or a broken piece of pottery called a pesos, lovingly reused by flicking off the crumbs. When you were done, you rinsed your hands in the nearest fountain, the same fountain you drank from later. Once the kytra was full, you emptied it in a cesspit behind the house, or, if you were feeling lazy, straight into the street gutter. Athens had drains, yes, but only wide enough for rainwater and the occasional stray cat. Every heavy storm pushed a brown soup down to Piraeus Harbor, where visiting sailors got a memorable welcome scent. Ancient travel guidebooks would have read, "Beautiful views, bring nose plugs." Still feel like staying for lunch? Good, because most people lived on bread, wine, olives, and hope. Wheat was expensive, so barley mush called maza filled the gap. The texture? Think damp cardboard mashed with sour vinegar. Meat showed up mainly at sacrifices, meaning you had to watch a priest slit a goat's throat before you got your kebab. Vegetables were seasonal and unwashed. Parasites loved this diet. They set up long-term rentals in your intestines and never paid a drachma. What about jobs? Roughly 9 out of 10 free citizens farmed tiny plots outside the walls. They plowed with wooden ards pulled by donkeys that ignored every order except snack break. Work began at dawn, paused at noon for watery wine, and ended only when darkness tripped you into the furrow. There was no weekend. The closest thing to paid time off was when the fields were underwater or your hoplite unit was being called to war, whichever came first. Craftsmen had it better. A potter spent his life bent over a wheel in 100-degree heat, breathing clay dust that glued to his lungs like wet plaster. Bronze smiths hammered beside furnaces without eye protection, so cataracts were a retirement plan. Tanneries soaked goatskins in urine vats, turning the neighborhood into a permanent nasal crime scene. If you could still smell after age 30, people assumed you were rich. Speaking of rich, only men counted as citizens, and only a slice of those actually voted. Women ran the household but legally ranked just above furniture. A wife's public outing might be a single trip a year to a festival, escorted by slaves and shadowed by stares from men debating whether she'd spoken too loudly. Girls married at 14 to men twice their age and began the marathon of childbirth that often ended before their 20s did. Slavery greased every gear in the Greek economy. Enslaved Thracians mined silver in shafts so low they crawled on elbows, breathing metallic dust until their lungs failed. Household slaves ground grain on stone querns from dawn to dusk, each rotation a reminder that freedom was someone else's luxury. In Athens, the enslaved population was larger than the citizen body, the quiet engine nobody praised in patriotic speeches. Feeling sick yet? Let's call the doctor, or rather the physician-philosopher with a beard long enough to sweep the floor. Ancient Greek medicine believed your body held 4 humors, and disease came from imbalance. Remedies included bloodletting, purging with boiled hellebore, and applying warmed cabbage leaves to literally everything. If your headache didn't fade after that, the physician suggested a gym session, because sweating out evil spirits never hurt the consultation fee. Teeth? They were doomed. Honey desserts stuck like modern glue, and toothbrushes were twigs. When pain finally drilled through your skull, the local dentist was a blacksmith with pliers heated in the forge for hygiene. Anesthetic meant biting on leather while your friends sang war songs to drown the screaming. If infection set in, you prayed to Asclepius and hoped the priest charged less than the undertaker. Disease loved the agora. Crowds packed shoulder to shoulder between fish stalls, coughing into shared wine cups while stray dogs fought over spilled entrails. Typhoid, dysentery, and tuberculosis swapped hosts faster than market gossip. Babies faced 50-50 odds of seeing their 5th birthday. Average life expectancy floated around 35, unless war drafted you first or childbirth claimed you sooner. Justice in the polis looked fair from a distance. Huge citizen juries, sometimes 500 men, heard cases. In reality, verdicts swung with mood, bribes, and whoever told the funniest story. Lawyers didn't exist yet, so you delivered your own defense under a water clock limit. Talk too slowly, the water ran out, and so did your freedom. Penalties ranged from fines you couldn't pay to exile, public whipping, or the hemlock cocktail that ended Socrates' career. Petty crimes met creative punishments. A merchant caught cheating weights might have his booth demolished and the rubble poured over his head. Adulterers could be beaten on the spot by any male relative of the wronged husband. Spartan men allegedly used thorn whips for extra emphasis. Debtors unable to repay sometimes sold their children into slavery, hoping to buy them back later if fortune turned. It rarely did. War never stayed quiet for long. Greek cities fought like siblings sharing one toy called regional power. Phalanx battles resembled armored traffic jams. 30-pound bronze panoply, 8-foot spear, and absolute trust that the man beside you wouldn't sneeze and drop his shield. One slip and an enemy spear found the gap between your linen corselet and your rapidly beating heart. Casualties piled up in minutes, and survivors limped home missing parts they never got back. Naval combat added seasickness to the mix. Triremes, sleek war galleys rowed by 170 sweating men, charged at ramming speed to splinter enemy hulls. Break an oar, and the captain cursed you in 6 languages, because rowers came from everywhere, and none were volunteers. When ships locked together, Marines leapt across decks swinging swords in chaotic brawls. If your ship sank, you swam in armor, or you didn't. Poseidon did not issue life vests. Sieges turned cruelty into slow art. Armies camped outside city walls, burning olive groves and poisoning wells. Inside, grain stores dwindled to boiled shoe leather. Archaeologists found gnawed rat bones in siege layers from Athens' own plague years. Diplomats negotiated truces while the population watched smoke rise from what used to be their harvest. Entertainment? If you weren't dying, you could watch someone else pretend to. Theater festivals drew thousands to stone amphitheaters for tragedies that ended with at least one stabbing and a chorus reminding you life was pain. Tickets were free, funded by rich patrons showing off their civic virtue. A cynic might call it hush money for tax dodging. Sports offered another distraction. The Olympic track baked in summer sun while naked athletes sprinted on crushed dirt. Winning meant a wreath of olive leaves and lifetime meals at City Hall. Losing meant going home to weed barley. Boxers wrapped fists in hardened leather straps that cut skin with every punch. The rules had 3 words: get him first. Referees carried switches to whip cheaters mid-bout. Instant replay, ancient style. Religion soaked every hour. You thanked Hermes before a business trip, Athena before exams, and Dionysus before doing something you'd regret tomorrow. Temples were beautiful but freezing, built of marble that leached body heat straight through your sandals. Sacrifices sprayed blood over altars, drawing flies thick enough to darken the sun. Priests read smoke patterns to predict victory. Generals ignored bad omens until they lost, then blamed the priest. Privacy was a foreign idea. Houses clustered around courtyards shared walls thinner than modern plywood. Neighbors knew when you argued, sneezed, or smuggled home extra wine. Nights were lit by olive oil lamps that smoked like cheap grills, filling rooms with soot that glued to your lungs as firmly as any battlefield dust. Literacy sat on an elite shelf. Boys of citizen families learned letters from wax tablets, scraping mistakes smooth with a stylus. Girls learned to weave because a good loom beat a good book in dowry negotiations. Most farmers signed contracts with an X and trusted the gods that nobody added extra clauses. News traveled by traveling bards who swapped stories for supper and sometimes invented entire Persian invasions to spice the saga. Currency jingled in everyone's head, but rarely in pockets. Silver drachmas paid taxes, temple fees, and dowries, but most daily trade relied on barter. A farmer carried a live chicken to market hoping to exchange it for new sandals, only to find the cobbler already drowning in poultry. Economists today call this inefficient. Ancient Greeks called it Tuesday. Housing was sun-baked mud brick, perfect until the first heavy rain melted your living room wall. Roof tiles slipped in storms and clobbered anyone standing below. Floors were packed earth-swept with thyme sprigs to mask the smell. Winter cold meant huddling around a brazier that pumped carbon monoxide in slow, cozy doses. Clothing looked classy on statues but sagged in real life. Wool chitons itched, linen wrinkled, dye bled in sweaty lines down your ribs. Laundry day involved stomping garments in lye mixed with ash and urine, then pounding them against stones until the fabric begged for mercy. Fashion changed at the speed of pottery styles, slow enough that you wore the same cloak from teenage years to midlife crisis if moths allowed. While you're picturing heroic philosophers, remember the classroom discipline tool: a stick. Lesson ran long? Whack. Wrong answer? Double whack. Socrates asked probing questions. The ordinary teacher preferred probing knuckles. Exams meant reciting Homer from memory. Mess up a line and start over until your voice cracked or the teacher's patience did. Environmentally, Greece was a dust bowl with scenic islands. Deforestation for shipbuilding stripped hills bare, causing erosion that buried ancient fields in gravel. Summers scorched, winters chilled to the bone through open-door houses. Water came from communal fountains that dried in droughts, forcing villagers to haul jars uphill to springs miles away. Hydration goal: 2 jars before sunrise or risk fainting midfield, becoming fertilizer yourself. Wildlife filled the gaps. Wolves prowled mountains, boars rooted vineyards and gored unlucky shepherds. Snakes coiled in stone walls for warmth. Superstitious families hung garlic and painted eyes on door lintels to ward off evil. Burglars shrugged and stole the garlic. Politics produced more drama than theater. Demagogues promised higher jury pay, free grain, and eternal victory against Sparta. Realities rarely followed. Speeches at the Pnyx relied on volume over fact. Heckling was legal sport. Votes were cast on broken pottery shards, so every election doubled as a recycling drive. Even leisure carried risk. A casual symposium might start with philosophy and end with katobos, the game of flinging wine dregs at a target while half drunk. Missed too often and your forfeit was downing more wine. Guaranteed hangover plus questionable decisions after curfew. Transportation offered 2 main options: feet or hooves. Roads were dusty ruts lined with broken amphora shards. A trip from Athens to Corinth, 80-odd kilometers, took 2 days if your donkey cooperated and bandits didn't empty your purse. Sea travel was quicker, but came with storms, pirates, and seasick passengers leaning over rails already slick with fish guts. Banditry thrived in mountain passes where even hoplite patrols feared ambush. Captured travelers were sold as slaves or ransomed. Insurance didn't exist, so merchants hired extra guards who charged more than the cargo's worth. Risk management class, ancient edition. If after all that you still imagined a golden age, visit a construction site on the Acropolis. Slaves dragged marble blocks up ramps while overseers shouted time to flute music meant to synchronize pulls. A missed beat could crush toes or bodies. The Parthenon sparkles today, but back then it cost countless backs and more than a few lives. Education for philosophers was an endurance sport. Students followed mentors on dusty walks for hours while scribbling notes on wax tablets that melted in summer heat. Tuition was paid in kind, maybe a sack of figs, and scholarships were called having a rich father. Nightlife dimmed early. City gates closed at sunset, so staying out meant sleeping outside the walls with stray dogs and restless spirits. Superstition said ghosts roamed crossroads after dark, which conveniently discouraged muggers who feared the same tales. Step in a pothole and you blamed Hecate, not city maintenance. Language barriers existed even between Greeks. An Athenian farmer would squint at a Spartan's harsh dialect like a modern tourist lost in rural Wales. Miscommunication sometimes led to friendly trade, other times to spear tips in ribs. Greek unity was mostly a marketing slogan invented during the Persian Wars, forgotten once the barbarians sailed home. Childbirth deserves its own chamber in this haunted house of history. Midwives worked with zero sterilization, zero painkillers, and clouds of incense meant to dazzle the gods. If labor stalled, they tied red wool around the mother's thighs, rubbed warm olive oil on her belly, and chanted hymns to Artemis, hoping the goddess moonlighted as an obstetrician. Maternal mortality was terrifyingly high. Losing both mother and baby meant a double funeral by sundown, and another dusty stele on the road to the cemetery. Surviving mothers thanked the gods, then braced for the next pregnancy. Once the naming feast ended, childhood marched like a drill sergeant. Boys trudged to wrestling school at dawn, learned lyre scales after lunch, and recited Homer until their throats cracked. Girls mastered weaving until their fingers bled fine thread. Toys were clay horses or knucklebones from sheep, because nothing screams fun like rattling a dry joint. Discipline mixed affection and fear. A disobedient child met the household rod, proof that corporal punishment arrived bundled with love centuries before Victorian nannies wrote the manual. Women's daylight hours blurred into a loop of spinning, baking, and hauling water from public fountains while praying the clay jar didn't shatter on the rocky walk home. They supervised slaves, balanced household accounts, and wove cloth sturdy enough to serve as dowries for future daughters. Yet they could not own land, vote, or even watch the Olympic Games. A few priestesses held sacred authority, but most women saw politics only through shutters, hearing men argue outside like thunder from a storm they would never stand beneath. Food markets offered the senses a brief holiday. Vendors hawked lupin beans, salted mullet, and honey-soaked fig cakes while half-wild cats prowled for dropped entrails. Wealthy diners sprinkled Indian pepper and precious silphium on their meals, the miracle herb now extinct because demand outran supply. Poorer bellies settled for black broth, a pork blood soup Spartans swore built courage but tasted like battlefield runoff. Wine anchored every meal, cut with water so citizens could argue philosophy without passing out before the second syllogism. Festivals rewound the social stress clock. During the Panathenaea, thousands paraded a gigantic embroidered robe up the Acropolis slope, honoring Athena with music, dance, and enough free bread to soften class resentment for a day. The Dionysia flipped decorum upside down. Revelers donned ivy crowns, guzzled watered wine, and heckled playwrights who dared bore them. Prize money for the best tragedy equaled months of a laborer's wage, so authors crammed betrayal, gore, and divine lightning bolts into every chorus verse just to keep the crowd from chucking olives. Even dying was complicated. Proper funerals demanded a coin in the mouth to pay Charon, the underworld ferryman with strict fare rules and no sympathy. Families wailed beside the pyre, tore hair and scratched cheeks to broadcast grief. Skimp on mourning rituals and restless shades were rumored to hover near the hearth, spoiling wine and scaring children. Tomb reliefs lining the main roads showed ideal scenes, mother handing baby to nurse, athlete tying sandals, pretending their final moments were tidy, not punctuated by fever or spear. The plague of Athens proved marble walls offer no defense against microbes. In 430, BCE disease slipped behind the long walls and spread like gossip through cramped quarters. Fever, rash, delirium, death, sometimes within a week. Historian Thucydides survived, and wrote that people died like flies, stacking bodies in temples when cemeteries overflowed. As many as a quarter of Athenians perished, including statesman Pericles, proving democracy could count votes, but not viruses. Doctors burned herbs, prayed to Apollo, and admitted they were guessing. Philosophers supplied coping strategies, or at least stylish vocabulary. Stoics preached that fate is unbreakable, so accept hardship with a stiff upper lip. Epicureans recommended moderate pleasure, garden chats, fresh cheese, and steering clear of politics as though it were contagious. Cynic Diogenes lived in a ceramic jar, rejected currency, and barked at passers-by who questioned his bathing schedule. After an afternoon debating whether virtue could be taught, thinkers still trudged home to smoky oil lamps, moldy bread, and a world stubbornly indifferent to logic.